Well, truck looks a little bit different now. Got some parts off Facebook Marketplace to help replace the junk ones we had on there before, but go ahead and took the fender off the bed and a few things in preparation for all this install, but we don't have to do that necessarily. That's just so we can film and easier show what's going on. It's not a real tight confined space. So we'll go ahead and start taking off all the factory stuff and then get ready to put the kit on. All right, before we get into the install on this kit, I thought I'd just go over the kit components and what's all included and give you a little bit of rundown of each individual component. So this is a complete independent front suspension kit that replaces all the factory components on your first gen Tacoma. And so this is intended to lay out a truck with 10 inches of usable travel with no ball joint bind, narrow the track width over 2 inches total, an inch per side to help tuck the tires, maintain proper geometry, not massive amounts of negative camber at full bump, and good high quality premium parts and a ride quality that you can drive daily. It functions well, like it's engineered, designed as a whole system, not just as like a fix, half-ass kind of a deal. So anyway, we'll just start off here and over in the corner of this whole kit. You got upper bag mounts. So these will be a weld-in part on the vehicle. There'll be a little bit of frame notching and some stuff you have to do to make these clear. But we've engineered them to have little tabs and locators. And as we go through the install, you'll see this. Lower arm bolts into the factory location, has all the hardware with it, including urethane bushings and all the replacement hardware for all the major components and pivots and everything are going to be AN hardware, good high quality hardware. Upper shock mount here with a machined bung that the shock would slide over, and then a bolt just captures it. And this is also going to be something that you have to weld onto the top of the frame. Alignment shim pack for the upper arms. There's another hardware kit for the spindle, and here is like a 3-inch version, 3-inch drop version of the spindle. We also make a 2-inch drop, so depending on which wheel and tire you're going to use, 3-inch drop will work for 20s, 2-inch drop for 18s. You can't run 18s on a 3-inch drop. The steering arm will get into the back of the wheel. So you gotta know what tire size and what wheel you're gonna use. The spindle is also designed to take a Willwood rotor hat caliper. And so we have some different options as well available for the kit to do drilled slot, plain, colored gray rotors, red or black, stuff like that. So there's a couple different options there for brake package, but that'll allow you to upgrade your brakes to better, bigger brakes as well versus the factory. And that also is what helps us lower the track width or narrow the track width in this truck. There's the bolt-in hub. This is new for version 2, is that this is designed to just bolt onto the spindle, and now you have a sealed bearing, maintenance-free hub assembly that if something ever does go wrong, you can just pull it out, buy a new one, good to go. High quality Bilstein shocks that are revalved by RCD specifically for airbag vehicles about of this weight. So we've got this all dialed in, worked with them on the valving. And so it's a really good shock that really helps this system out and works very well. Upper arm hardware pack, new urethanes. Here's the upper arms. And so the unique thing about this suspension design is upper arm and spindle, you'll notice, uses a uniball interface flipped on its end. And so that allows no upper ball joint bind or anything to get that full 10 inches of travel. So that's pretty unique. And then strut rod replacement. So factory strut rod bolts into the stock location. And there also is going to be a little bit of cutting and fitting here. And then this is the interface piece for the shock, and there's the uniball bearings and all the hardware AN and all that stuff as well. And then so as an option for the kit, so this is everything that's included as part of the full package, complete and everything. The only thing you'll have to reuse is your upper arm cross shaft for the stock Tacoma and the lower ball joint steering arm, which that lower ball joint steering arm you can just buy brand new. They remanufacture. The cross shaft is not remanufactured. There's no way for us to get it. So that will need to be reused or found in a junkyard or whatever if yours is no good, but they don't really wear out. And we got all bushings and adapters and everything to go from metric to standard and everything to work out right, so there's no problems there. As an option to add on if you'd like, to make it even more of a complete system, airbags, Slam Specialties 7-inch bag is what we have designed it for. SS7 is what they're sold with. Used to be the REs, but they have been phased out. And then as another option that's not required, but some people like to add it in, is a new front cross member for the strut rod. So you would cut all the strut rod mount stuff off, and then these would bolt on to the side of the frame pointed in, and then a new cross member that we fabricate would bolt in to that location and then give you a new strut rod. Looks more like this. And so it doesn't affect anything as far as the geometry and how it functions. It really just gives you a bolt-in cross member and a replacement, because a lot of these trucks have been drug, and so there is no cross member left, or it's tore up or whatever, because it's the lowest point on the vehicle. So that helps replace that and also makes it replaceable. And then it's also got a 1/4-inch skid plate on it as well. So that kind of goes through the overview of everything here. So what we'll do is we'll hop on over and start tearing down the stock stuff and then replace it with this entire kit, and you'll be able to just see it all in detail. So the first thing we're gonna do, we got all this factory stuff. So first thing we'll do is we'll pull the caliper up and out of the way, and then we can go ahead and take off upper, lower ball joints, sway bar, all that, be able to just take this whole unit off as one unit here on the spindle, and then that'll give us access to be able to get to the spring, the shock, strut rod, and all that. So we'll start in with there. First thing we gotta do here is take off the bolts for caliper. Looks like this top one, the brake line's right in the way. So hopefully that one loosened up enough. Ratchet can fit on the lower one. So now we can pull these caliper bolts. There's a bolt here holding the line, and there's a bolt here holding the line on the brake caliper. Take off this one, take off this one, and then take off the 2 bolts behind here, and that'll help you take off the caliper. Change of plans. So easier way to do this is to pull these 2 nuts off here, and then there's 2 on the bottom here, and this will pull this whole ball joint assembly off that we can take off, and then loosen this castle nut, take the cotter pin out, whack the side of it with a hammer, pull that taper off there, and then we can pull this off and get the whole assembly out. Brake line bolts are out. Let's see what we got. Get this line out of the way. Truck's been sitting a little bit. There we go. And let's see if it would fit up in here and sit. Might have to get a zip tie. So I just got that kind of wedged up on the inside of the frame, sitting on behind the rack there. So now we'll be able to take off upper and lower ball joint and pull this whole spindle off. Now we should be able to just pop the top ball joint out, finish undoing the nuts here, lower ball joint,
pry it off there. And ta-da. Assembly gone. So now I can take the sway bar off here on the chassis, take the strut rod out. So reach in here and grab sway bar mounts, get that out of the way. So we got this all freed up. Now what we're gonna do is come in here. There's double nut on top of the shock. So we'll take that off, the top nut, and then we'll take the strut rod off at the chassis and the cross member in the front, and then get ready to jack up the lower arm and take off the shock and spring. So now we got this bolt loose. We can pull it from here. Come on. It's hard to do one-handed. There we go. Strut rod gone. Take tension off it. Grab the top of the shock. Loosen the lower nut. Dirt, crap on the threads. Of course. Rubber bushing, all that off. Now we should be able to get the 2 bolts under here on the shock. Pull everything out, lower this out, and be careful on this because this will want to spring out. There is tension, so be super careful when you lower this down that the spring doesn't come flying out. Well, that's loose. Drop the shock out. Like that. And then stand clear. And don't carefully let it down.
Look at the cups on
Like that.
Just
Now we can unbolt the lower arm, pull it out, and then there's 2 bolts here on the cross shaft. Actually, we can just pull the 2 bolts behind, like where you align it on the back side of the hat. You can pull those 2 bolts and then cross shaft and everything, arm will all come out. Come in here, get the lower arm, and then you want to save this lower bolt. This lower bolt on the arm is reused. We're close. So unscrew these 2 bolts on the upper A arm, and we'll have her all stripped down and go over what we got to cut off. Complete upper arm assembly, and we'll need to reuse this cross shaft. So we'll need to take these outer bolts off, push the shaft out with the bushings. We don't need the bushings, but get all the bushings and get the shaft out, and then we'll reuse this cross shaft, as it's not included as part of the kit. And actually you have to get these from a junkyard or somewhere. You can't even, these aren't even available new, so you'll need to reuse this. Here's the pile of parts that we all stripped out of the front end on the one side, which very little of it will be used again. So this is what it looks like with everything stripped out on there. So we need to remove these bump stop pads and this whole spring hat and all this, and this little brace or whatever you want to call it. It's like a little bump stop. But what you want to be sure is there's an overlap back here. This side, this outside overlap stays. So there's a weld right here, so you cut right along the weld, and this inner pocket comes out, and then up on top here, you're just gonna go straight up the back and cut this front part off. But you do not want to cut this main portion here that holds the upper A-arm. So just this weld along each side, come over here, weld this long right here. You want to leave these verticals, and then on the top here, you just want to come straight across from this vertical straight across here. and then get all rid of these stuff and clean all this frame up, and then we'll do the rest on showing how to do the pocket. So we got this all cleaned up, and then like I said, we came straight up from this outer piece and cut it off and then trimmed this all nice and clean. Then we got our upper bag bracket, so it's the next thing to go on here. So on the bag bracket, you can see there's these little ears, and what those are meant to do is grab the top of the frame and sit on it. So the width of this bracket fits on the inside of your existing bracket, and then those little ears will go up here and hang on this top of this radius. These are radiused as well. So, but this bag, it needs to be pocketed into the frame a little bit. So I'll put the measurements, and actually we'll have it like the template as part of the kit that you can lay on here, and it shows you where to mark out. We'll cut this little box out. And you want to make sure you don't cut too much of this out, because then if you cut too much out, you'll have gaps over here and here that you can't weld, well, just harder to weld up and all that. So so you just make sure you make it kind of tight, and then you can fit it in there and make it nice and tight and clean, because this is also like a frame stiffener. Goes along here and it lap welds over the frame, and then it pockets this inside here for the bag to sit in and clear. Here's the pattern lined up on the top of the frame. This will be included as part of the kit, but you can set this up here, line it up. It'll show you where to cut it out. And then this square is this little pocket will cut out, and that'll allow the bag backer to slide right in. Magically, it's cut out. Fit this up here, you can see, so get it hung on the frame with those little ears like that. And so now we have this pocket, and then we can go in here, C-clamp it, tack it into place, get it located. We got this all clamped in here. We checked to make sure we're up on the notch of the frame. So I'm just gonna tack it on so we can get the clamps out of the way. And then we can move on to the upper shock mount and stuff as well. You just gotta squeeze your head in here. So we can pull these off, watch everything pop, you know, because I didn't tack it good enough. No, it's all good. Now the next step is we got the upper shock mount. They are side specific, so you want to make sure you get the right side on the right one, which is, this should be vertical. If it was on the other way, it'd be leaning way far forward and, you know, be way out here. So there's a flat spot right here on the upper bag mount, and so the side of the shock mount, it nests on like that. It'll rest against this little flat portion of the upper bag mount, and that locates this shock mount. So we'll get it on there, held on there, and then give it a couple tacks as well. Tacked in, next step. So then we'll move on to the upper arm. Here's the factory arm. We'll need to save this dog bone and this end hardware and washer. And what you want to do is, no matter how someone put it, factory or whatever, when we install it, we're going to have the cup side faced out on this, and that will put proper pressure on the bushing the cupped way. Because we have a flange bushing, we're switching to a different style of flanged bushing. We don't want this cupped in, we want it cupped out like this. And then the factory bolt goes in. So we got to save this hardware and this dog bone hardware on this side. So we don't care about this upper arm, so we're just gonna cut the arm apart and get the dog bone out. If you want to save it, you can try to press that stuff out, but on this one we don't care, and you can find these arms everywhere, so I'm not going back to factory. So we got this cross shaft out, cleaned up, and I just kind of go over the order. So you may have to, so I'm just showing this for purposes. What you'll want to check is that this can actually slide through here. Sometimes, you know, these cross shafts vary a little bit, so sometimes you're going to have to do a little bit of grinding right here to make sure it can fit through. But when it's all installed, what you'll have is this is an adapter to go from, we're using, you know, standard bushings, and this is all metric. So this adapter adapts it from metric shaft to the inside of this bushing here. So this flange face will be faced on the inside, and so this will be a tight fit. So you're gonna have to like press it on. The best is to use like a little like a socket or a sleeve that goes on here, and you can press this on to the shaft with hydraulic press. Don't just beat the shit out of it with a hammer or something. You don't want to mushroom this all out or anything. And then make sure this is nice and clean. This is nice and clean. You'll press this on here where the adapter will go on, and then the bushing will go on from the opposite side on the A-arm. So if we're looking at it from the A-arm standpoint, this will be on the inside, bushing will be on the outside, and then the then the cross shaft will be in here like this. So we're gonna go press these on and then be able to install this dog bone in the new upper arm. So here's the cross shaft pressed on, or the adapters pressed on the cross shaft. So the best plan of attack, well, then basically what we have to do is push these bushings in from the outside. So we'll push one in, and then this will just slip through, and then you can push the cross shaft onto this bushing here like this, and then you can take the second bushing, center up on the cross shaft, and push it on the arm, and then they'll be fully installed. Don't forget, we have these little super lube packets of grease, and you need to grease the inside of the bushing here to the cross shaft sleeve, because that's your pivot point. You don't need to grease from the outside to the arm, because your pivot should be the shaft, should be this cross shaft on the urethane is your pivot. The bushing will stay attached to the arm as part of the arm. And the other thing to notice is these bushings are a very tight fit with all this in here, so they do push hard, or, you know, don't beat the shit out of them. You don't want to bend this arm or do anything weird. And then make sure the inside of this bushing is nice and smooth. If you have them powder coated, make sure there's no powder coat in there or anything in there, because they won't fit. And if you need to, you can take like a brake hone and smooth that all up on the inside to make sure these slide on nice. The next step here is lower arm. So you got the lower arm here. What we'll want to do is push each bushing half in, then put the inner sleeve in, and then we can bolt that in the stock location. And then this is the adapter here. Then we'll start working on making the strut rod to the lower arm. So I'll go push these bushings in. Easiest way to do is just use a vise and push the bushings in. Like I said, don't forget to lubricate this up as well. We got the bushings pushed in, so now we can bolt this arm up. Use the stock bolt. So here's something to notice. These Tacomas from the factory, you can see how much slop we have here. So what we need to do is set this arm level. So measure from here to here, here to here. And then we need to center this arm here and then tighten it up. So for some reason the back is a little bit bigger, like a millimeter larger than the bolt. Both sides are that way, factory seems to be that way. So center this up so that we get our caster close. And then we can build this strut rod because we have to cut it and fit it. So get it centered up and tightened up, and then we can use this and do the strut rod and go from there. So I went and got a jack stand here so we can measure off the table 15 3/4. That's too high. And then let's see here, let's go to here. And then I just got a little wood shim here. I'll press it in 15 3/4 right there. So now we know the arm's level. So straighten it up this way, tighten the bolt, and we're ready to start on the fabricating this strut rod. Now we're moving on to the strut rod, which will look like this for the stock one to go in here. The uniball, this will go in by hand. If you just get it in straight, don't fight it, just, you know, get it in and like, don't do a press or anything like that. It'll go in, then you stick the stap ring in. And then misalignments will go on to here, and that'll go in. And then we also have these machined adapters to take up the difference between the misalignment stack width and the cross member. We had to make little adapters. So misalignments. This is the fun part when you need multiple hands, but these go in from the inside. So the flange is on the inside of the cross member, like so. Hold your tongue just right. There we go. And bolt here. Okay. For now, I just have a temporary washer. We include a nylock, but for now I'm going to use a non-nylock because this is just for the install temporarily. So next piece is this, and this serves two purposes. It does both the shock mount and the strut mount. So same thing. And so I get it oriented right, it'll be here. I'm stacking 2 washers because that'll make the length easier. Then you can fine adjust. We give you enough washers depending on you want to have the shock on here and squish. So we just put the sleeve on now. This eventually will be, the shock would be up here, but we don't need the shock. And then this bolts into the side of the mount. So let me grab the camera and I'll show you here up close. This kind of shows what it looks like. So when the shock sleeve's on, there'll be another bolt that bolts here. This 3/8 bolt here goes in the arm, like so. And then your shock will be on here, and then this will screw all the way on. And then when you swing this arm up, you see you got movement because of the uniball, and so the arm lays right along in here, and then it comes long. See how it's a little bit long because these Tacomas, this has been variable, and so we didn't want to make this all mount, and then it's pretty critical that it bolts in here and gets your arm right, so because all that slop. So what we'll do is get this bolted in, put this on top, and then you can come over here and mark the length of the tube here, then bring the arm over, and then mark the length of the tube up here, and then that'll give you 2 lines top and bottom. And then you can cut this arm, and then when you bolt it back in, just flip it over 180, and it'll set right inside of that, inside of this. You can see right here, it'll sit right on this flat spot. And then you may have to do, you know, If it doesn't, depending on this little angle, do a little trimming, little sanding, make it fit nice, clean it all up, and then that can all be welded right on. And that'll mount across the strut rod to the lower arm, and then it will unbolt. So the strut rod and the lower arm will be different and be able to put the shock in between here. So we'll do that and come back. Cut and fit nice. So this will slide in here, center it up here. And what you want to do is make sure that the cup for the uniball is vertical and centered. It's not all canted over weird inside because when we weld this kind of indexes everything. So just kind of hold it here, line it. We can tack it here. And then once it's good and tacked, you can pull the strut rod out and fully weld it. When you tack this, make sure your ground is on this lower arm. Don't ground to the frame because it'll go through that uniball because it's bushinged here. So it'll have to go through the uniball and it'll ruin the uniball, the Teflon and all that. So make sure you're ground to the part itself so that we're right here. So you can tack it, then pull it off. Then we'll go through here, we'll finish weld all this stuff on, get everything fit, and get this, and then we can just assemble the front end, all the new parts. I mean, now that we have this all welded up, everything got final welded, we can assemble this front end and put it in. It's pretty straightforward, but I thought I would just kind of go over, while everything's out, go over a couple little details to make sure that, you know, everything's explained. Like we talked about, make sure that these washers are cupped out on the upper arms. That's pretty self-explanatory. There's the bolt to go in to the upper part of the spindle. And then we also include some of these pre-cut alignment shims for the backside between the dog bone and the upper mount to move that arm inward. That helps with the camber adjustment. These arms are a little bit longer than factory, so you probably will need to use one of the thicker ones to start with just to get it so it's not positive camber. You want to get it into negative camber, or like around, you know, half a degree or so. But don't be alarmed, and they vary depending on trucks. We've had them all over the board with customers, so that's why we include 3 different sizes, and you can get it close, and then you can use the factory shims to actually get the alignment where you want it. On the spindle, it uses uniball upper for a ball joint, and then it uses the factory lower ball joint that has the steering arm from tie rod for the rack. So you put this in with the same misalignments like the strut rod cross member, and then this is the new unit hub bearing that just bolts in on the spindle. So the only thing to really notice when you bolt that in is if you look at the side profile, the bottom bolts have 3 stacks of thickness. So it's going to use the longer here, and these top 2 only have 2, so it's the shorter 2. And then these are the same. These same ones are for the lower ball joint to go into here to what we call the stilts. And they have a little counter bore machined into them so that the top of this ball joint goes inside indexes and fits in there right nice and snug. And then these are caliper bolts. We'll get into brakes as separate once we get this all bolted in the truck. Don't use the factory inner bushing sleeve that comes with these Bilsteins. We provide a different one that fits better. It's a little bit longer and fits in this. And then we went over all this strut rod stuff already, so on goodness. So we used to assemble all this stuff, put it on the truck, put the airbag in, the shock, get it all done, and then I can go over the brake stuff. It'll be a completed kit. we got her all bolted together. Just like we talked about, there wasn't anything crazy or difficult about it. So here, I'll show you some detailed shots of it here, and you can just kind of see it all installed. See how it all fits. Looks great. Shocks in. Strut rod, stock cross member strut rod, brand new lower. So the reused parts to go over that was, we bought a new ball joint, but we'll probably start including those with the kits, or you can just get them at any local parts store. And it'll come with a new castle nut. And then the lower arm bolt back there on the frame is reused. And the dog bone here with the end washers and the hardware is reused. And then that's it. Everything else is new. And then we'll go over brake stuff now and get the wheel woods installed on it on the spindle and be good to go. Now we got the brake parts. I've already assembled this, but I can just explain. So the rotor hat and the rotor will come separate, and then it'll come with a pack of hardware that you use to bolt it all together, and they also have a hole in there, so when you're done and finalized, you safety wire them all together so they don't come off. So really the only thing to look at here is the mounting face for the rotor itself is flush on one side and sunk in on the other. That flush side is the hat side, okay? And then if you got the drilled and slotted option, there's a right and a left, so pay attention to the arrow there. So you just come in here, bolt them all in, and then easy deal. They slide right on there, and then caliper bolts directly. Let me turn this here. And it bolts directly onto the spindle like so. And so all you'll want to look for that is we send this AN hardware with it, so it's got a shoulder that's specified. Now we'll send a series of thick washers and thin washers. They call light and normal. One's 60 thousandths, the other's 30 thousandths. So depending on how it all lines up, and like they vary slightly between spindles on just how they have to be shimmed. So here's some of the thin washers. You can see they're half as thick. And so as a good starting point, you'll have to put in like maybe one thin washer between the spindle and the caliper, and then the two thick washers on the head side. And so what you'll want to watch is that if the caliper's not requiring a bunch of shims, you'll have to put those shims on the head side, because the length of the bolt, you don't want it to hit the back of the rotor. But if you need shims, then you move them from the head side to the other side of the spindle, and that will space the caliper. So you'll put the pads in the caliper, mount it all up, just snug it, and then put feeler gauges and measure, and you want to center this on the rotor within, like, I think Willwood specs, technically like 20 thousandths is your tolerance you have, and you can get there any which way between the combination of 60s and 30s. You can get them all there. So these will just go in, and these also have drilled heads. I would Loctite them, and then also they can be safety wired so the caliper doesn't come off. So you'll just put the caliper on, bolt it on, and that's it. Everything's installed, full complete kit, and then we get to put wheels and tires on and lay it out. Thanks for watching.